Good morning. Jim, yeah. Is that not on? It is on. Do we have a program that shows an order of speakers? We're going to be going a little bit out of order in view of the events, the unfortunate events of the morning here in Washington. And certainly we're thinking about and hoping for speedy recovery for those who were injured in this crazy event. So, but we have to turn to the topic at hand, and thank you all for joining us. I'm John Levy. It's my distinct privilege and honor to serve as the 10th chair of the board of the Legal Services Corporation. Thank you for joining us as we release this morning a new and important study, The Justice Gap, Measuring the Unmet Civil Legal Needs of Low-Income Americans. I want to thank Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut for making this room possible. I'm especially grateful to the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation and the Kresge Foundations for their generous funding of this study. I would also like to thank the members of the Justice Gap Advisory Committee for their assistance and guidance in this project. I know a number of you are here. Would you raise your hand so we can all acknowledge you? Thank you. I also want to thank the significant and acknowledge the significant contributions of NORC at the University of Chicago, retained by LSC. NORC conducted data collection and produced the data analysis that informs this study. LSC previously produced reports in 2005 and 2009 on the justice gap, the difference between the civil legal needs of low-income Americans and the resources available to meet those needs. Those studies were conducted, and the phrase justice gap created during the outstanding tenures of LSC's 9th board chair, Frank Strickland, and LSC's president at the time, Helene Barnett. Both of them are here today, and would you both stand and we can recognize you too. This current study provides fresh data, profound insights into how many low-income Americans are unable to secure adequate civil legal assistance, the range of legal problems they confront, and how insufficient resources affect veterans, persons with disabilities, residents of rural America, parents and guardians, and victims of domestic violence. Among the many eye-opening findings, 86% of civil legal problems reported by low-income Americans in the past year received inadequate or no legal help. In the past year, 71% of low-income households experienced at least one civil legal problem. In 2017, low-income Americans will seek legal aid from LSC-funded organizations for an estimated 1.7 million problems. They'll receive only limited or no help for more than half, estimated about 60% of those problems will not be assisted because of limited resources. We'll be hearing much more about the details of the report and its significance to the legal aid community shortly from LSC President Jim Sandman and NORC Vice President Mike Dennis. We will also be privileged to hear remarks from the distinguished co-chairs of the Bipartisan House Access to Civil Legal Services Caucus, Representative Joseph Kennedy of Massachusetts, Representative Susan Brooks of Indiana. The wonderful co-chairs of LSC's Leaders Council, former White House counsel Harriet Miers, Merck CEO Ken Frazier will also be speaking, as will one of the better-known members of that council, University of Michigan head football coach Jim Harbaugh. Batting cleanup, as she has done at several LSC functions this year, will be ABA's tireless distinguished president, Linda Klein. Well, as our board has traveled the country holding 3 meetings a year out in the States, we have heard stories from small city and large city America, rural America, tribal reservation America, of how hard our grantees are working to try to help as many qualified individuals as possible. But because of lack of resources, they find it impossible to meet the need that extends out their door seemingly every week. Local, state, and federal courts have throughout our tenure repeatedly told us each year millions of individuals are showing up in their courthouses pro se in matters that have profound consequences for them and their families. The findings of this study, therefore, do not surprise me, and I doubt they will surprise those in the field, but they should worry us, even alarm us, because they are leaving too many folks out of our justice system to go it on their own, and that threatens our country's confidence in the fair accessibility of our justice system. Not long after our board was in office, we met in San Diego, where we were privileged to hear from former 10th Circuit Judge and then Pepperdine Law Dean Danelle Taha. Her words have stuck with me. Quote, "When the great majority of the individuals and small businesses of the nation no longer can, or believe they no longer can, get a lawyer, be represented effectively, go to court, settle their disputes in a fair and impartial way, and be treated like every other citizen, we quite simply have lost the guiding principle of our republic, equal justice under law. When that goes, the rule of law goes, and when that goes, the great dreams of those patriots who fought and founded this republic go with it, never to be reclaimed. Something must be done." Well, we've been trying in our tenure everything we know to call attention to the gravity of this crisis. Well, 40 years ago, when my own father, Edward Levy, ended his service as the 71st Attorney General of the United States, he reminded us in his farewell address that the values on which the country is founded, quote, "can never be one for all time. They must always be one anew," unquote. Well, we present this study today in that spirit. And it's now my privilege to introduce a real champion of LSC and civil legal aid, the remarkable representative from Massachusetts, Congressman Joe Kennedy III. Joe.
John, thank you. Thank you for your commitment. Thank you for all that you have done under the leadership, your leadership at LSC to make today possible, to push us and to push our country to make good on that promise of equal justice. I have to say that countless lives I know have been changed through your advocacy, and all of us here today are deeply, deeply grateful. Folks, obviously we are all here today under difficult circumstances, and I want to send my own prayers to my colleague, Mr. Scalise, members of Capitol Police, protecting as members of Congress, other individuals that were injured, and their families this morning. Difficult day, I think, for all of us. We end up getting sucked into these debates about politics often. You forget the fact that Mr. Scalise's locker happens to be next to mine in the gym. And so it hits home in the morning when normally you're showering and getting cleaned up, and the guy next to you, normally razzing you about something, doesn't happen to be there. So we're all praying for him. And to Congresswoman Brooks, who I know both of us have to leave right after this to get over to a security briefing that's been called, given the events of this morning. But I do want to say she's been an absolute champion, and it's been an honor to work with her on so many issues around access to legal services as we try to educate our colleagues on the importance of why we're here today. On a note of personal privilege, I have to say to Coach Harbaugh, between you and another distinguished Michigan alum, some guy named Tom Brady, it's making it awfully hard for me to root against Michigan these days. So thank you for lending your voice to this cause, to one that I think impacts so many people across the country. And as my in-laws would be proud to hear me say, go blue. So thank you. Finally, to Jim Sandman, to Harriet Myers, to Ken Frazier, to Linda Klein, to the folks at Newark and Mr. Dennis, thank you so much for your dedication, for your advocacy, and all that you have done and continue to do to make good on that promise, again, of equal protection under law. For those of you that have heard me talk about this before, I have blatantly plagiarized Jim Sandman a number of times. I try to adopt that thing in politics of saying plagiarism is the epitome of flattery, so thank you. I normally attribute it to you, but I have to say I don't always, but I'm grateful for all that you have done, Jim, in this quest. So, folks, for too many Americans, our promise of equal justice under law is a commitment that is unmet. Nowhere is that shortcoming more obvious than in our civil courtrooms. As a young legal aid volunteer in Boston's housing courts, I saw that firsthand. And there's a particular client that I will always remember. For the sake of this morning, I'll call her Sarah. She was a low-income African-American woman, had a couple of kids, living in a neighborhood in Boston. Paying her rent in the midst of the foreclosure crisis, when the landlord couldn't make the mortgage payment, bank came in and foreclosed and evicted her, even though she didn't do anything wrong. In the middle of a school year, she uprooted her family and moved into another apartment to try to get them back into school and get the family settled. And a couple of months after being in that apartment, the same thing happened again. Except this time, she said, I can't leave. I can't do this to my kids twice. So I'm going to stay. What happened then was a series of bullying tactics and illegal maneuvers that was done by a servicer trying to force her out of her home. It culminated in individual coming by and actually changing the locks on her door while she was out grocery shopping. She came back, found herself locked out, had to call the fire department to break down the door so that she could get back into her home. So it happens that one of her sons was coming back to see the fire department break down that door, and he suffered from mental illness. He seemed fine that day, and the next day when he was at school, his junior year, suffered a mental breakdown and had an outbreak. And his grades plummeted. He was a football player. His recruitment suffered. And Mom was genuinely concerned as to what his prospects might be. She didn't know where to turn, but finally, as she was getting evicted, she turned to a lawyer. Because of legal services, we were able to help that woman and her family navigate a court system, get some money to actually fund the mental health treatment for her son, keep them in a home, and get him funds needed to get him off to college. And that, to me, is what today is all about. Beneath the statistics outlined in this report are faces like Sarah's. People that are navigating an endless and impossible maze built only for those who can afford to hire expensive lawyers to lead them through it. For those people, Legal Services Corporation is not just a resource, but a lifeline. Chronic underinvestment in LSC for decades is forcing compassionate lawyers and advocates to turn away those who are most in need, from seniors to veterans to people with disabilities, vulnerable parents, and even survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. This underinvestment threatens the crux, the core, the promise of American justice. But it is more than just erode the values that we hold dear. It wreaks an economic havoc that threatens to undercut families and communities for generations. For those families, LSC is a saving grace in a way that we keep that promise. It's an investment we make in people, not just because it is a good and decent thing to do, but because they will reinvest it 100 times over down the line. And homes kept, and families held together, communities strengthened, jobs saved, and lives lifted up. And that's what makes the meeting today, this report today, so important. Under the auspices of a budget that proposes to eliminate Legal Services Corporation in its entirety, makes it all the more incomprehensible. And it's why this report is so critical. It helps tell the story of legal services and those of Sarah in every community across the country. It shows that equal protection is not just a noble cause, but a sacred promise. It outlines in devastating detail what happens when the laws of our nation fail to protect each of us equally. And it prepares us for a fight ahead. So I'm proud to be in this with all of you and to consider myself a partner and a friend in your efforts. And I could imagine no greater partner and no greater friend in these efforts than my colleague from Indiana, Ms. Brooks, who has lived a life steeped in the law, practiced it from every which way you can imagine. And having her advocacy and efforts along our side in this fight has been absolutely instrumental. Susan, please.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you all. I have to admit, I was holding it together this morning until I heard my dear colleague talk about the relationships that we all have. And so thank you, and I want to join in the prayers for our colleagues, for our staff, particularly for the Capitol Police, who all of us come here each and every day. Most of us don't take them for granted, but everyone around here typically does, because this is a very safe place, but yet shootings like this morning remind us of, sadly, the target sometimes on elected leaders' backs and those who serve to protect us. And so just want to thank you, Joe, and thanks for your leadership of this important work. I was going to make some other remarks, but quite frankly, we have a briefing that begins at 11:15. And so I'm going to be incredibly brief. Want to thank you all of the leaders who are here. I think he named you all. Want to also thank Coach Harbaugh. I'm the daughter of a high school football coach, and I'm from Indianapolis. And so we've watched your career for many years, and having your voice does make a difference. It helps those of us lawyers who maybe people don't pay as much attention to some of us as we would like, for those of you lawyers and judges and so forth in the room. But I will tell you, this does give us, it gives us evidence that we can now present to the Budget Committee, to the appropriators, and I want to thank you for your work on this. I will, as the Republican member co-leading with Joe, the caucus on access to civil legal services, will be able to use this information to make sure that we do continue with robust funding. I visit with my Legal Services Corporation folks at home. I keep track of what they're doing. And I have been, whether it was as a public defender many years ago, working in the criminal justice system many years ago, whether it was as a U.S. attorney, you may or may not know, but Joe and I have co-sponsored a bill together to try to get U.S. attorneys to hold conferences to focus more on domestic violence. And the story I was going to talk with you about was Ava, a domestic violence victim in Indiana, who LSC came in and helped an immigrant who did not know until she had suffered horrific burns at the hands of her husband that she could actually pursue a divorce in this country, that she could protect her children, who she needed the help with after the courts removed her children because she was in the hospital so long from recovering from the burns. And so there are so many things that we know that people need access to legal services to put their lives together. And because of LSO, she's now going through the naturalization process to become a United States citizen. So there are many things and so many stories, and you all know them, obviously. For those of you who are staff, if you aren't familiar with the stories, there are lots of stories behind each one of these statistics. And so while there are a lot of statistics here, there are so many stories. I want to thank you all for sharing those stories. I plan to work hard with my great colleague, Joe Kennedy, and work on this issue here in the House. And with that, need to go and learn more about what happened this morning, make sure that we all can remain safe, not only here in the nation's capital, but wherever we all travel. But I will share one bit of something I'd just like to share that I've been saying. The level of rhetoric and hate in this country is far too high right now. Violence is never the answer. We may disagree politically, we may disagree philosophically on some things, but we are Americans. We are a country that democracies and those that want to be democracies look to each and every day. Violence is never the answer. I don't know anything about the shooter. I don't know if it was an individual or working in a group. That's what our incredible law enforcement is going to work to try to find out. But I think, and I hope and pray, and if I know Steve Scalise, he will say, let's join together as a country, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, and show the world that we're better than this. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. And we'll be bringing LSC to Indiana next year. So it's now my privilege to introduce our friend Harriet Miers. Harriet really needs no introduction here in Washington. She's the former White House counsel to President George W. Bush, and we currently asked her to co-chair, and she has certainly been working as a co-chair of LSC's Leaders Council. Harriet served the Bush administration first as an assistant to the president and staff secretary, then as assistant to the president and deputy chief of staff. In 2005, she was appointed White House counsel, served as the administration's top lawyer through February of 2007. For her work as White House counsel, she received the Department of Justice's Edmund Randolph Award and the CIA's Agency SEAL Medal. Harriet is a leader in the bar. She was the first woman president, I think, in Texas for the state and the Dallas Bar Association. She led her law firm. What hasn't she done? She's a remarkable person and a remarkable partner. There isn't anything I've asked her to do to help LSC that she hasn't stepped right up and done. And I'll tell you, the flight back down to Texas is not quite as short as the one to Chicago. So, Harriet, thank you so much for being here.
Well, those of you who know John Levy, you know why I never say no. So thank you, John. You know, you always are calling people amazing. And that needs to be underscored when it applies to you, because you in your leadership in this arena has been stalwart and constant, and we are so grateful to you, just like we are grateful that you have allowed us this morning to share this remarkable occasion, and it is that, to look at a report that tells us the extent to which in this nation, our nation, we have a justice gap. And we are all here, I know, because we are eager to examine and understand how we can do better to help close that gap. Now, LSC's Leaders Council is a group of about 60 members, and they're from all over the nation, and they include a broad range of individuals from fields of the law, business, academics, and of course, sports. And I am so honored to co-chair this group with Ken Frazier, who is another person who is amazing and a leader in this area. So thank you, Ken. A big part of the council's mission is to help us focus the public's attention on this issue way beyond just the legal community or the community of legal services that knows about it naturally. So we are, through this report and through many activities and the council, trying to expand people's understanding and knowledge, because once you do, you'll act. It's that compelling a story. The findings of this report demonstrate that LSC's charge to fund and promote the efficient and effective delivery of civil legal services is more important than ever. The Legal Services Corporation, you probably know, was first formed in 1974, and that was with congressional sponsorship, bipartisan congressional sponsorship, and the support of the Nixon administration. Over time, Congress and LSC have taken steps to ensure that the federal funds, as well as other funds that are used by LSC grantees are spent wisely and only on basic civil legal needs. LSC provides critical legal assistance, and this has been mentioned, and you're going to hear a lot of the same themes in everyone's remarks this morning, I would venture to say, but LSC serves veterans in need of legal services to get the benefits they've served us to get, victims of domestic violence, victims of human trafficking, families being forced out of homes. What an incredible story. People being forced out of homes by unlawful means, persons with disabilities, the elderly, and victims of natural disasters. You have to see a natural disaster and participate in the cleanup before you fully appreciate what legal services and volunteer lawyers do in those events. The Justice Gap report released today focuses on these groups we've mentioned, and it confirms emphatically the legal challenges that those people face and the sad fact that their needs so often go unmet. Providing civil legal services to the poor and vulnerable, it's not partisan. It's not liberal. It's not conservative. What it is, it's a righteous, right thing for us to do. And in the words of a member of the House, it's a noble cause. As the report demonstrates, it's also urgently needed. The words of Justice Scalia at the celebration of the 40th anniversary of Legal Services Corporation not so long ago were very powerful. And it's a high privilege today for me to speak those. He said, "The American ideal is not for some justice. It is, as the Pledge of Allegiance says, liberty and justice for all." Or, as the Supreme Court pediment has it, equal justice. I've always thought that was somewhat redundant. You can hear the justice saying that, can't you? Can there be justice if it's not equal? Can there be a just society when some do not have justice? Equality, equal treatment is perhaps the most fundamental element of justice. Great words indeed. And it's my pleasure now to turn the podium back over to Jim Sandman, who will address you. And I have to say about Jim, I've heard him present so many times on these issues, and I appreciated what the congressman said. Anytime you can quote him, get even close to his wonderful words, you're doing great. And I try to emulate him and usually can't measure up, but he'll be a treat. Jim.
Thank you, Harriet. I'm Jim Sandman. I'm president of the Legal Services Corporation. LSC, as you know, is the country's single largest funder of civil legal aid programs for low-income Americans. We fund 133 independent legal aid programs with more than 800 offices serving every county in every state, the territories, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. No matter where you are in the United States, there's an LSC-funded legal aid program providing assistance to low-income people. The report we released today documents the volume of civil legal needs faced by low-income Americans in 2017, assesses the extent to which those with civil legal needs seek and receive help, and measures the shortfall between the civil legal needs of low-income Americans and the resources available to meet those needs. We call that shortfall the justice gap. The study is rich, detailed, and important. It is the first national assessment of civil legal needs in 23 years. I can reduce its conclusions to 3 points. First, The volume of civil legal needs among low-income Americans is enormous. Second, most of those needs receive no or inadequate assistance. And third, the consequences of not receiving adequate assistance in addressing civil legal needs can have a severe impact on people's safety, their family stability, their housing, and their health. Let me briefly explain each of these 3 points in turn. First, the volume of civil legal needs among low-income Americans. Today, more than 60 million Americans, almost 20% of the population, qualify for LSC-funded civil legal aid because their incomes are at or below 125% of the federal poverty level. That's $15,075 a year in income for an individual, $30,750 in income per year for a family of 4. In the past year, 71% of low-income households experienced at least one civil legal problem. This is 23% higher than the last time a study of legal problems was done at the national level, the 1994 study that the American Bar Association did on legal needs and civil justice. 1 in 4 low-income households experienced 6 or more civil legal problems in the past year, including 67% of households with survivors of domestic violence or sexual abuse. The civil legal problems these Americans face are most often to basic needs, like getting access to health care, staying in their homes, and securing safe living conditions for their families. Conclusion number 2, most of these problems receive no or inadequate assistance. In the past year, 86% of the civil legal problems faced by low-income Americans received no or inadequate legal help. Low-income Americans seek legal help for only 20% of their civil legal problems, and are more likely to seek help for problems that seem obviously legal, like matters related to child custody and wills and estates. The top reasons people don't seek professional legal aid: they decide to try to deal with the problem on their own. They don't know where to look for help or what resources might exist, or they're not sure that their problem is a legal problem. In 2017, low-income Americans will seek legal aid from LSC-funded organizations for an estimated 1,700,000 problems. They will receive only limited help or no help for more than half of these problems because of limited resources. Conclusion number 3, the consequences of not receiving adequate assistance in addressing civil legal needs can have a severe impact on people's safety, family stability, housing, and health. 7 in 10 low-income Americans with recent personal experience of a civil legal problem say it has significantly affected their lives. The types of problems most likely to have a significant impact are those related to veterans issues, income maintenance, employment, rental housing, and family. As a part of this study, we focused on some particularly vulnerable populations. Some of the findings are alarming. For example, households with survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault are particularly likely to experience civil legal problems. 97% of them experienced at least one problem in addition to the problems related to violence. 67% of survivors of domestic violence reported having at least 6 civil legal issues in the last year, the highest of any of our special focus areas. Parents or guardians of minor children have significant legal problems. 80% of low-income households with parents or guardians of minor children had at least one civil legal problem in the past year. 35% of those households reported having at least 6 legal problems. Persons with disabilities 80% of households with persons with disabilities had at least one civil legal problem in the last year. 32% of those households reported having at least 6 legal issues. In rural areas, 75% of low-income households had at least one civil legal problem. 23% of those households reported having at least 6 legal problems. And veterans. 71% of households with veterans or other military personnel had at least one civil legal problem in the past year. 21% of those households had at least 6 problems. Finally, seniors. 56% of low-income senior households had at least one civil legal problem, and 10% of those had 6. In summary, the vast majority of low-income Americans have significant civil legal needs that affect their families, their livelihoods, and their safety. And our nation's civil legal system is failing overwhelmingly to meet those needs. The bottom line is this: we are defaulting on our nation's solemn pledge of justice for all. We owe it to our nation's founders, who placed justice at the very top of their value scheme, and to the future, to redeem America's pledge, to make equal justice under law a reality and not a cruel illusion for people who cannot afford to pay for a lawyer. As the great Justice Lewis Powell said, equal justice under law is not merely a caption on the facade of the Supreme Court building. It is perhaps the most inspiring ideal of our society. It is fundamental that justice should be the same, both in substance and availability, without regard to economic status. Let it be so. I would now like to introduce Dr. Michael Dennis, Senior Vice President of NORC's Business Ventures and Innovation Unit and Executive Director of AmeriSpeak, NORC's multi-client panel-based research platform. Dr. Dennis is a nationally recognized expert on survey research methods with a particular focus on online surveys and household panels. He will describe the study methodology for the Justice Gap Report. At the conclusion of our program this morning, when everyone is finished speaking, Dr. Dennis and I will be happy to answer questions. Dr. Dennis.
Good morning. Thank you, Jim, for the excellent summary, the key findings, and the perspective that you bring. As Jim mentioned, I am here to represent NORC. I'm a Senior Vice President at NORC, and to talk about the survey methodology that we use for the Justice Gap Survey, the measurement survey. Our goal at NORC was to conduct a scientifically rigorous and credible survey to inform decisions and bring survey data to inform those decisions for the Legal Services Corporation, its grantees, decision makers. Many of them are in the room today, also in the private sector, as well as the larger public with an interest in addressing the justice gap in our society. First, a note about NORC. Over the past 75 years, yes, we have been in business 75 years, NORC has worked closely with our partners and clients to shape research questions and objectives, gather and analyze the data, and derive the insights that allowed governments, nonprofit organizations, individuals, and citizens around the world to make more informed public decisions. NORC has been one of the leading innovators in survey research methodology, as demonstrated by our recent introduction of the AmeriSpeak panel, which is the sample source for the Justice Gap Survey. A word on the AmeriSpeak panel. NORC created this panel, which we call AmeriSpeak, so that we could conduct scientific surveys like this one, like the Justice Gap Survey. Before AmeriSpeak, the public opinion research community struggled to conduct statistically valid but yet cost-effective surveys of low-income households. The existing infrastructure for surveys in this country, even the best ones, fell short in their ability to provide researchers access to these hard-to-reach populations, particularly low-income households that disproportionately do not have internet access, that disproportionately may have literacy challenges that prevent them from taking surveys online, or simply may not have an interest in participating in research. A distinction to make at this point is that there are dozens of other online survey research panels in the United States, and they are often used for consumer market research and even for research that informs public policy. However, the AmeriSpeak panel, which we've created in ORC, is unique in this way. It is based on both random selection of U.S. households and also the use of face-to-face, in-person interviewing as part of the recruitment of this random sample of U.S. households to join our panel. So there's face-to-face interviewing and recruitment and the random sampling of U.S. household. This combination gives AmeriSpeak a unique advantage and ability to provide a representative sample of low-income households in the United States for this Legal Services Corporation project. We at NORC believe that we have produced a survey that gives a voice to the civil legal experiences of low-income households here in the U.S. We surveyed 2,028 low-income households for the project, providing a representative sample and broad cross-section of low-income households in the U.S. Just a few numbers to give you a sense of the representativeness of this sample. Almost 70% of the respondents in our survey have modest levels of educational attainment, a high school degree or less. In a typical four-person household in our survey, 1 in 4 had an annual income in the past year of less than $10,000. 1 in 7 of our respondents actually are from non-metropolitan areas, from rural outlying areas. Gives you evidence of the representativeness of this sample. Now, when tallying up all the civil legal problems experienced by our some 2,000 respondents, we documented almost 10,000 civil legal problems experienced in the last year, almost 10,000 civil legal problems. The survey asked about 88 different types of civil legal problems that households might have experienced. We tailored the questionnaire so that it would be appropriate for distinct groups. For instance, you can expect veterans to have different kinds of civil legal problems compared to other groups. The survey also collected information on households' perceptions of the severity of their civil legal problems, and we also collected information on the perceptions that they have of the civil legal system itself. Finally, the survey includes a series of detailed questions about households' attempts to seek professional legal and general help, non-professional help, with their civil legal problems, the type of help they received, and the sources of that help. In short, in conducting the survey, we at NORC believe that we have created a special database, a database that takes a statistical snapshot of where we are right now with the state of the justice gap in the United States, and we provide it with extraordinary depth and scale. There are a few technical aspects of the survey that I should mention because I believe they add additional layer of scientific integrity to the data we collected. First, the survey was conducted by professional telephone interviewers for those respondents that were not comfortable taking the survey online or have literacy challenges or perhaps have no internet access at all. Secondly, we did make the survey available in both English and Spanish. We recognize that to represent the Hispanic community adequately in the United States, Spanish language interviewing is a requirement. Third, with the active collaboration of staff at Legal Services Corporation, We conducted extensive pre-testing and qualitative research of this survey questionnaire and refined that questionnaire through a series of steps before we asked our respondents to take the survey. And fourth and finally, and this is my last remark, in conducting the survey, we at NORC have complied with the professional standards of the American Association for Public Opinion Research, including the Transparency Initiative standards, which we abide to at NORC. To its credit, Legal Services Corporation has made available a companion report that details all technical aspects of the survey, and I refer you to that report for detailed information. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you to your team. It is now my pleasure to introduce the head football coach of the University of Michigan's Wolverines, Jim Harbaugh. You all know Jim from his outstanding career as a quarterback, first for Michigan, the Chicago Bears, the Indianapolis Colts, and his tenure as head football coach for the University of San Diego, Stanford University, and the San Francisco 49ers. But to those of us in the legal aid community, Jim has a different identity. He is one of the most active members of LSC's Leaders Council and has attended or appeared at a number of LSC events during the last few years. I'll let him explain why he's so passionate about the importance of civil legal aid. It didn't surprise me, however. 30 years ago, my then paralegal, who had grown up as a childhood friend with Jim in Ann Arbor, brought Jim over to our office in Chicago as a new member of the Chicago Bears before he'd ever taken a snap. I was impressed then, and I've remained impressed throughout his career and today. It's a special privilege for me to introduce my good friend, a great American, Jim Harbaugh.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Harriet called you a stalwart. That is one of my very favorite words in the entire English language. And as a leader, as a friend, as a great dude, you are a stalwart. And I'm happy to be here as well. I want to congratulate you on the LSC release of the new study today that focused on core American value, equal access to justice. And many of you are probably wondering why a football coach is doing an event like this. I may be a football coach, but I am an American first and foremost, and all Americans should care about equal access to justice. For me, it's not just Michigan and go blue, it's go red, white, and blue. And I like lawyers. I'm comfortable with lawyers. Many of my friends are lawyers. I'm a huge fan of Judge Judy. So I know a lot about the law through that. Even attended a taping of her show. And a few years ago, one of my lawyer friends, John, and had given me a book that was about his father's speeches called Restoring Justice. As you have already heard, Edward Levy was Attorney General in the Ford administration, and I read that book, almost all the speeches, and I've said it before, well, Doc, it calmed me down. Sometimes when I got stressed, I loved reading about the law, and your father was a great man. Not long after, I attended an LSC forum on access to justice, one of several LSC events I've attended, and learned how many people are being left out of the justice system because they can't get a lawyer. It didn't seem fair then, and it doesn't seem fair now. That's why I became a member of LSC's Leaders Council and why I'm here today. The issue is about fairness, fundamental fairness. As I see it, if you have money, you have access to justice. If you don't have money, you have less access to our justice system. and that's not the way it should work. I'd bet you a milkshake that if we asked every person in this room, outside this room, are your chances better to win a civil suit, a case in court if you have a lawyer, or are they better if you don't have a lawyer? We're all going to agree it's better to have a lawyer. I also, if you allow me a football analogy, a sports analogy, it's about a ball team, being on a football team. Also think of our country as a team that we're all on. And it's fairness on a football team is probably the thing you strive for the most. You may not treat everybody exactly the same, but you want to be fair to everybody on the team. And it would be like, if I could make an analogy, it'd be like only giving 20% of the team a helmet. The rest of the team doesn't get a helmet. You don't get protection. Run out there and play in the game without a helmet, and we'll see what happens. Well, they'll get hurt, Everybody, and then they'll start talking about this guy's got a glass jaw. He gets hurt all the time. Well, you don't have the protection, and as the study is showing, there's 70, 60, 50% and more that don't have legal protection when they go to court. That's why this new report is so important. It shows in detail the many legal challenges that confront low-income Americans and how hard it is for them to get legal assistance. It shows that we have a lot of work to do to make sure all Americans have access to our justice system. I intend to join in that work as best I can, not only as a member of LSC's Leaders Council, but as an American, and I challenge our lawmakers to take meaningful action towards narrowing the justice gap between those that can afford it and those that cannot. Equal access to justice is a founding principle that our America was built upon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. It's now my privilege to introduce the other co-chair of LSC's Leaders Council, Ken Frazier. Ken, as you all know, is the chairman of the board and CEO of Merck & Company. He previously served as president of Merck with responsibility for the company's three major divisions: sales and marketing for pharmaceutical and vaccine products, manufacturing supply, and Merck Research Laboratories. Prior to that, Ken held a wide range of leadership positions with Astra Merck and was a partner in the law firm of Drinker Biddle in Philadelphia before leaving for Merck. Mr. Frazier, that is, Ken, is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the President's Export Council, the Business Council, the Council of the ALI, the American Bar Association, serves on numerous boards, and I have to say, is just a remarkable co-leader of the Leaders Council. As busy as he is, when his schedule permits it, he has been here for us, and he will continue to be. He's just remarkable, and I'm so privileged to introduce to you Ken Frazier.
Thank you, John. Let me echo my co-chair Harriet's comments. You are quick to give accolades, but this entire day and much of the movement behind this day would not be possible without John's leadership. You heard earlier that he comes by it honestly, in terms of it coming from his father. I know I work with your brother at the American Law Institute, and I can tell you that the Levies are people for whom justice is not a hobby. It is the central part, the animating part of their lives. I want to also thank Harriet for being my co-chair. My status is hugely enhanced anytime I can be associated with you. I want to thank Jim and Michael Dennis for their presentation, which is the content that has us here today. Jim Sandman being a fabulous leader here. Coach Harbaugh, I'm not going to bring up the whole way you ran up the score on my alma mater, Penn State, last year. I'm just saying I'm not bitter. But at the end of the day, it helps a lot to have someone like you who's not a lawyer, who stands up and says to other non-lawyers, this is important. You are, in fact, a celebrity. I know you think Judge Judy is a celebrity, but from our perspective, having you as a part of this effort is really going to make a difference, because with all that's happening, it's hard to crash through the consciousness of people, and you will help us tremendously. So thank you very much. Let me just say a few words about this critical study. I think it does shed new light on the crisis we know exists in civil legal aid. It's a crisis that we're confronting all across this country, in every sector of this country. It should also play a big role in informing the work of LSC, its grantees, and those of us who are privileged to serve on the Leaders Council. As my Leaders Council co-chair, Harriet Myers, has noted, we've been working hard to raise public awareness of the crisis and access to justice, and this report provides fresh and compelling support for this effort. I'm here today also in my capacity as a CEO of a large American company to talk about how expanding civil legal aid and narrowing the justice gap is also a crucially important thing for companies like mine. It's very important, not only to the people that are left out, it's also important to us insiders in American business. You see, businesses cannot function successfully in a society that itself is not functioning successfully. And that requires equal justice and equal access to justice and the protection of legal rights. Businesses depend on a justice system that allows consumers, employees, and employers to access their rights and protections. Like health care, legal rights and protections don't matter at all unless people have meaningful access to them. Without this access, we face a lack of trust. And those of us who run businesses know that the most precious asset on our balance sheet is the public's trust. Businesses also need a reliable workforce and employees who are dealing with issues of housing, domestic violence, health, and child care will be much less productive and far more absent than others. By assisting employees with these problems, civil legal aid not only ensures access to justice, but also helps maintain a smoothly functioning and reliable workforce. Perhaps most importantly, business requires social cohesion, which is threatened when millions of Americans feel they're not getting a fair shake in the justice system. It is a problem not only for business, but for all of society if people begin to feel that they can't trust our institutions, that they don't have a stake in our country, or that the rules we were all taught in school about American values no longer apply universally. As we've just heard, and this study demonstrates to considerable detail, far too many low-income Americans are not being afforded equal justice. This betrays a basic principle of our society. As Thomas Jefferson observed, the most sacred of the duties of a government is to do equal and impartial justice to all of its citizens. This study demonstrates that we must all do more to make sure that this sacred duty is upheld, enforced, and honored. And now it is my pleasure to introduce my friend, Robert Gregg, who's not only a board member of LSC, but is also a former president of the American Bar Association and a staunch advocate for efforts to close the justice gap for low-income Americans. Bob?
Ken, it's always a pleasure to be with you, my colleagues on the dais, all of whom have held significant leadership positions throughout their careers. Harriet Myers, a managing partner, Jim Sandman, a managing partner of their law firm, and our next speaker, a managing partner of her law firm. The commonality of these individuals is that not only have they held leadership positions where it has required their professional skill and acumen to be on display, but they've used the opportunity when they've had the mantle of leadership to lead in ways that inspire all of us, to give meaning to the responsibility that lawyers, specially trained, skilled, have a responsibility to give back to society that which has been given to them in so many ways. Linda Klein, as senior managing shareholder Baker Donaldson in Atlanta, was the first woman president of the Georgia Bar Association. You could do many things when you're president. You can advocate for the profession, you can advocate for yourself, you can advocate for your colleagues, or you can take a higher position that includes them, but the rest of America and people in need. And that's what Linda did. As an advocate for Georgia Legal Aid, she used the bully pulpit, she used her leadership position to advocate for increased funding for legal services in Georgia. Here she is, sometime later, recognized and rewarded for her hard work by her colleagues to be elected president of all the lawyers in the country. She again has the bully pulpit. She again has the opportunity to advocate. And what does she do? She makes the cornerstone of her presidency the important task of ensuring that proper funding comes to the Legal Services Corporation so that not only lawyers can benefit from the opportunity to practice their craft and their trade, but for those who are in need of justice and of access to our courts are properly funded in order to achieve those goals. Ken, you will recall last Monday, we were at the National African American History Museum, and Vernon Jordan received the Global Leadership Award from the African American Law Students Association at Harvard and the Leadership Institute at Harvard. And in a stem-winding speech, something we know he's not too capable of, trace the history of various minority groups in America and how it was access to the courts, the justice provided by our system of checks and balances that allowed us to recognize and appreciate the value of human contributions to our society. Whether it is civil rights, whether it is gender rights, whether it is individual rights. We are the most diverse country in the nation, and we are the beacon of hope for justice in this country. And if we don't do it, who is? And if not now, when? And I can tell you the person on the point, doing it right now, doing it for all of us, making America proud of its system of justice, not only here, but abroad, is Linda Klein, President of the American Bar Association. Join me in welcoming her.
I'd like to say your check will be in the mail. Thank you so much. That Robert Gray is my role model. We call him a rock star in the legal community, and now you all know why. So thank you very much. As a child, when I attended Public School 114, every morning we pledged allegiance to the flag and affirmed that our country stood for liberty and justice for all. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I knew it made the United States of America special. In Beach Channel High School, I studied the Constitution, and right there at the beginning, I saw that our more perfect union would establish justice for everyone. I realized then I was privileged to live in a great country. And that's probably when I decided to become a lawyer. At Washington and Lee Law School, I learned, unfortunately, that justice for all was just a dream for many Americans. And every year, millions of Americans are deprived of our nation's promise. You've heard today, they're the victims of physical abuse. They're senior citizen victims of scam artists. There are people who lose everything in natural disasters, or military veterans fighting for themselves in a legal system that can be complicated and confusing. The Justice Gap report underscores how important it is to preserve and fully fund the Legal Services Corporation. We heard as many as 86% of civil legal problems of low-income Americans received inadequate or no help. This is a travesty, and the situation is getting worse. Studies of the legal needs of Americans by the American Bar Foundation in the 1970s and by the American Bar Association in the 1990s both revealed a significant gap between the legal needs people experience and the ability of our system to provide it. Unfortunately, the new Justice Gap study shows that the problem has accelerated. The number of people eligible for LSC-funded assistance is at record levels, and the level of unmet legal needs remains astonishingly high. The American Bar Association applauds the Legal Services Corporation and the University of Chicago NORC for continuing this research and bringing our knowledge of this important issue up to date. It is crucial that we understand both the dimension of the gap, which is frankly more like a chasm than a gap, and the specifics of what kinds of legal needs go unmet and by whom. Lawyers in the trenches know that legal help can give hope, and it solves problems that people can return to their normal, productive lives. The vast majority of that hope and the legal help comes through the Legal Services Corporation and the legal aid agencies it funds. Without LSC, courthouse doors all over the country will slam in the face of millions of Americans, and our communities cannot bear that loss. The case for the funding of legal services is crystal clear. The Legal Services Corporation guarantees basic dignity and rights of every American with minimal resources. Without the services that LSC and its grantees provide, America would be a much poorer place. And the cause of equal access would be much weaker. The cost-benefit argument is just as compelling. More than 40 analyses demonstrate legal services' valuable return on investment. In 2015, one state bar reported $11.21 of economic benefit for every dollar invested. It's common sense that it saves money when a legal aid lawyer can save a client from homelessness or other problems that have long-term societal costs. And members of Congress know that because there is an LSC-funded office available to every congressional district, their staffers refer constituents in need to legal aid. LSC funding, in essence, is a valuable constituent service that cannot be replaced. That's why funding the Legal Services Corporation has always been a nonpartisan issue. With the American Bar Association as a chief supporter, Congress created the Legal Services Corporation in 1974 with overwhelming support from Democrats and Republicans, beginning with President Nixon. The ABA was there for the birth of the LSC, and in the 1980s and 1990s, when policymakers threatened to eliminate funding, the ABA joined with other advocates, and we all rose up and stopped that. And we're continuing to advocate for the LSC now, better armed with information and experience, and stronger than ever. Our grassroots campaign at defendlegalaid.org, I'm wearing the button, you can all have one. We spread that over social media. It's garnered over 20,000 participants with individual constituent cards delivered to members of Congress demonstrating the priority our communities have in equal justice for all. And the cards are still pouring in. You can go to defendlegalaid.org and fill out your own. I've heard John Levy call the American Bar Association an indispensable partner of the Legal Services Corporation. I've heard Jim Sandman say that LSC would not exist without the ABA's steadfast support. But it's ABA members among the millions of Americans grateful for your work who are privileged to help. The LSC embodies the best of the legal profession, serving people who need it most and ensuring the Constitution's promise. We cannot imagine America without the Legal Services Corporation. You all have a strong, steadfast ally in the American Bar Association, and together we will defend legal aid. We will work and we will advocate for equal justice so our great nation can live up to the promise we make to each other as school children: liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
I want to particularly thank Jim and Michael for the study, for the breadth of its reach, for the depth of what it's now informing us about the nature of the justice gap. To Ken, to Harriet, to our Leaders Council, members of whom are here, to our board, Jim Harbaugh, Linda Klein, Robert Gray, thank you all for your stirring words. As a country, we have a choice. We can continue down this road from the Justice Gap studies that Helene and Frank, in their tenure, authored, to this new study. We can see that the gap is widening. Now, we can either take that seriously and stop the bleeding, and looking towards the country's 250th birthday, 9 years away, let's put ourselves on a trajectory to close this gap, completely close this gap, and let's live up to the guiding principles of our republic. Thank you all for coming. I know that Jim and Michael are here to answer questions. Are you going to do that from here, or how are we going to just make yourselves available? And thank you all, and thanks to those who couldn't come, and thank you very much.